In our world, there are lines that should never be crossed. The line between protecting a child and persecuting them. The line between enforcing the law and abusing it. And the line a petty officer and a weak-willed principal crossed when they decided to make an example out of the wrong kid. They thought he was just a quiet black teenager, an easy target in the sterile hallways of Northwood High. They didn't know who his father was. They didn't know that in a few short hours their world of comfortable authority would be dismantled piece by piece by a man who wore a different kind of uniform, a uniform earned with honor sacrifice and an unshakable code they could never comprehend. This is the story of how a father's quiet fury forged in the fires of duty brought a reckoning that would echo far beyond the walls of a single school. The bell at Northwood High School shrieked, signaling the end of fourth period. 15-year-old Michael Smith felt the familiar knot in his stomach unclench slightly. Lunch. An hour of relative peace. He was a quiet kid, not by choice, but by nature. While other boys were loud and boisterous, chasing clout, or girls, or both. Michael lived in the worlds he created in his sketchbook. His worn, spiral-bound notebook was his most prized possession. Its pages filled with intricate alien landscapes, armored warriors and superheroes, whose powers were as complex as their moral codes. He slid the sketchbook into his Jan Sport backpack, zipping it up carefully. His best friend, Sarah, a girl with fiery red hair and a galaxy of freckles ounced on the balls of her feet beside his desk. "Are you going to finally ink that Sentinel design today?" she asked, peering over his shoulder. "The one with the plasma scythe. It's sick." Michael offered a small smile. "Maybe. I'm still working on the pauldrons. The perspective is tricky." "You and your perspectives," she teased. "Come on, let's grab a table before the freshman mob takes over." They joined the river of students flowing into the hallway. The air was thick with the scent of Axe body spray, floor cleaner, and teenage anxiety. Northwood was a decent school, nestled in a sprawling suburban community that prided itself on its manicured lawns and high property values. It was a place of perceived safety, where the biggest dramas were usually about who was taking whom to the homecoming dance. But a subtle tension had been simmering beneath the surface for months. A new pair of school resource officers, or SROs, had been assigned to the campus. The previous SRO officer, Miller, a friendly middle-aged man who knew most students by name, had retired. His replacements, Officer Kyler and Officer Davis, were different. Kyler, in particular, walked the halls with a swagger that bordered on aggressive. He was a man with a shaved head, a thick neck, and eyes that seemed to be permanently narrowed, searching for a challenge. Davis was his shadow younger, and seemingly more hesitant, but always backing Kyler's play. As Michael and Sarah passed the boys' restroom near the cafeteria, the door swung open, and a cloud of sickly sweet mango-scented vapor billowed out. Two junior football players, notorious for their bravado, sauntered out, laughing. Michael wrinkled his nose, and Sarah coughed theatrically. Vaping in the bathrooms was a constant low-level problem. The school administration seemed powerless to stop. They got their food and found their usual table in a corner of the cavernous cafeteria. Michael pulled out his sketchbook, the outside world fading as he focused on the cross-hatching of a character's glove. He was so absorbed that he didn't notice Principal Thompson approaching their table until the man cleared his throat. Mr. Thompson was a man who seemed perpetually overwhelmed. His tie was always slightly askew, his brow furrowed with a constant low-grade worry. Behind him stood Officer Kyler and Officer Davis, The casual din of the cafeteria seemed to dim. Michael Smith. Mr. Thompson asked, his voice strained. Michael looked up, startled. Every eye in their section of the cafeteria was now on him. "Yes, sir. I need you to come with me to my office," the principal said, avoiding his gaze. "Bring your belongings." Sarah's hand flew to her mouth. "What's this about Mr. Thompson?" she asked, her voice sharp with concern. Officer Kyler stepped forward, placing a hand on the principal's shoulder in a gesture that was less about support and more about taking control. "That's official business, young lady. Just stay put." His eyes locked onto Michael's, and a cold dread washed over the boy. "Am I in trouble?" Michael asked, his voice barely a whisper. His heart was hammering against his ribs. He did a frantic mental inventory of his day, his week, his life. He was a good student. He'd never been sent to the principal's office for anything more than a forgotten permission slip. "We're just going to ask you a few questions," Mr. Thompson said, already turning to walk away, as if he couldn't bear to witness what was coming next. Michael's hands trembled as he packed his sketchbook and lunch back into his bag. He stood up, his legs feeling like lead. Officer Kyler gestured with his chin. "Let's go. Now." The walk to the office was the longest of Michael's life. It felt like every student in the hallway stopped to stare, their whispers following him like a swarm of angry bees. He was paraded past the main office and into Mr. Thompson's private room. It was a small, cluttered space with framed photos of the principal's smiling family and a wilting fern in the corner. Mr. Thompson sat behind his large oak desk, looking deeply uncomfortable. Officers Kyler and Davis stood on either side of the guest chair, effectively blocking the door. They hadn't told Michael to sit, so he stood awkwardly in the middle of the room. So Michael Officer Kyler began, his voice dripping with condescending familiarity. "We've had some reports of students using illegal vaping devices on school property, specifically in the restroom you just walked past." Michael's mind flashed back to the mango-scented cloud and the 2 football players. "I saw some guys coming out of there, but I didn't." "I'm not asking what you saw." Kyler cut him off, his voice hardening. "I'm asking what you were doing. You fit the description." Michael's blood ran cold. "What description?" "Quiet kid. Loner type. Keeps to himself," Kyler said, circling him like a predator. "You think we don't know the signs? You think we don't know who the troublemakers are?" "I'm not a troublemaker," Michael said, his voice shaking. "I have a 3.8 GPA. I'm in the honors art program." Kyler chuckled a low, ugly sound. "An artist, huh? What kind of art you make?" He nodded towards Michael's backpack. "Let's see what's in the bag." "That's my personal property," Michael said, clutching the strap. He'd heard his dad talk about rights, about probable cause. This didn't feel right. Probable cause is that a vape was used in your vicinity, and you fit the profile of someone who might be trying to hide something. Kyler said the legal term, sounding twisted and perverse, coming from his lips. He looked at Mr. Thompson. "Principal, are you authorizing a search of the student's bag for school safety?" Mr. Thompson wrung his hands, his eyes darting between the officer and the terrified student. This was the moment for him to be a leader, an advocate for his student. Instead, he folded. The school's code of conduct allows for searches if there's reasonable suspicion, officer, for safety. The words were a betrayal. Michael felt the floor drop out from under him. Kyler's lips twisted into a triumphant smirk. "You hear that? Hand it over." Michael didn't move. A spark of defiance inherited from a father he deeply respected flared in his chest. No. The change in the room was instantaneous. Kyla's faux-friendly demeanor vanished, replaced by raw aggression. He lunged forward and snatched the backpack from Michael's shoulder, the force of it spinning the boy around. "Hey, Michael!" cried out. Kyla dumped the entire contents of the bag onto the floor. Textbooks, a half-eaten apple pens, and his precious sketchbook skittered across the linoleum. Officer Davis shifted his weight, a flicker of discomfort in his eyes, but he said nothing. Kyla ignored the books and immediately picked up the sketchbook. He flipped through the pages, his expression a mixture of contempt and feigned understanding. He stopped on a page depicting a complex, multi-limbed creature, a being of shadow and light, Michael had named the Adjudicator. "What is this supposed to be?" Kyla sneered, holding it up for Thompson to see. "Looks like some kind of gang nonsense to me. All these weird symbols. They're not symbols, it's a character design." Michael protested, his voice cracking with emotion. He felt violated, his private world exposed and ridiculed. "I want to be a concept artist for video games." "A video game artist," Kyla repeated slowly, drawing out the words. He then flipped to another page, a detailed map of a fantasy city Michael had been creating for a story. Or is this a map? Planning something, are we? A little meet-up. Maybe a delivery spot for whatever you're selling. That's ridiculous. It's a fictional city called Silverwood. Silverwood, huh? Kyla's eyes glittered with malice. He had found his angle. He didn't need the vape pen anymore. This was better. This was a narrative he could spin. "Principal, this looks to me like it could be construed as conspiratorial material. We might have something bigger than just vaping here." Mr. Thompson looked pale. "Now, officer, let's not jump to conclusions." "My job is to jump to conclusions, Principal. It's how I keep people like you safe." Kyla shot back. He turned to Michael, his face inches from the boy's. "I'm going to give you one more chance. Where is the vape? Who are you working with? I don't have one. I don't know what you're talking about." Michael was crying now, tears of frustration and terror streaming down his face. "Wrong answer," Kyla said softly. He reached for his hip. The click of the handcuffs being unlatched was deafening in the small room. He grabbed Michael's arm, twisted it behind his back, and slammed the cold metal onto his wrist. "What are you doing?" Michael screamed, struggling. "I didn't do anything." "Stop resisting," Kyla barked, wrenching his other arm back and securing the second cuff. The metal bit into his skin. He shoved Michael forward, forcing him into the chair. Mr. Thompson stood up, his face ashen. "Officer, is this really necessary? He's just a kid. He's a good kid. He's a suspect." Kyla corrected him, puffing out his chest. "And until I'm satisfied he's not a threat. He's my suspect. On your property. You're welcome." He turned to his partner. "Davis, call it in. We're bringing him down to the station for questioning." Davis hesitated for a fraction of a second. "Kyla, maybe we should just call his parents first." "We'll call them from the station," Kyla snapped. "He's a juvenile. It's procedure. Now do it." Davis sighed and pulled out his radio. Michael sat in the chair, handcuffed, his world collapsing around him. His art, his passion was being twisted into something ugly and criminal. His principal, the man supposed to protect him, was a statue of indecision. And these officers, these men with guns and badges, were acting like he was a hardened criminal. He felt a profound sense of hopelessness. Meanwhile, back in the cafeteria, Sarah had watched them lead Michael away. She knew Michael. She knew his heart, his gentle spirit, and she knew this was wrong. Her own fear was a cold knot in her stomach, but her loyalty to her friend was stronger. She pulled out her phone, her fingers flying across the screen. She didn't call Michael's mom, who was a nurse and would be in the middle of a shift. She called the one person she knew could fix this. The one person who had always told Michael that if he was ever in trouble, he couldn't handle to call him, no matter what. She found the contact in Michael's favorites list, a simple entry, Dad. She pressed the call button, her heart pounding a frantic rhythm against her ribs. It rang once, twice. A deep, calm voice answered. "This is Sergeant Major Smith." Sarah took a shaky breath. "Smith." "It's Sarah, Michael's friend. Something terrible is happening at school. You need to come. Right now." Command Sergeant Major Marcus Smith was in his office at Fort Harrison, a sprawling military base about a 30-minute drive from Northwood. The walls of his office were a testament to a life of service. There were plaques from units he'd led, a framed photo of him shaking a general's hand in Afghanistan, and a glass case holding the medals that told the story of his 22-year career. But the most prominent photo was on his desk, a picture of his son Michael holding up a ridiculously detailed drawing of a dragon, a proud, gap-toothed smile on his 7-year-old face. Marcus was a man carved from discipline and resolve. He was tall and broad-shouldered, with a presence that commanded attention without him ever having to raise his voice. As a command sergeant major, the highest enlisted rank in the U.S. Army, he was the senior enlisted advisor to a battalion of over 800 soldiers. His job was to be the unwavering standard-bearer, the bridge between the commanders and the troops, the embodiment of integrity. He dealt with logistics discipline and the welfare of his soldiers day in and day out. He had seen the best and worst of humanity in some of the most dangerous places on Earth. When his phone rang, he saw the school's number and felt a flicker of annoyance, assuming it was another automated call about a bake sale. But the call that came a moment later was from his own number, which meant Michael was using his emergency call feature. Then the call dropped, and a text came through from a number he didn't recognize. His blood went cold when he read the name Sarah and the frantic plea for him to come to the school. He stood up his chair, scraping against the floor. His aide, a young sergeant named Peterson, looked up from his desk in the outer office. "Everything all right?" "Sergeant Major." Marcus's face was a mask of controlled calm, but his eyes held a glacial fire. "Peterson, I need to leave. A family emergency. Cancel my 1400 briefing. Reschedule my meeting with the supply chief." "Sir." "Yes, sir," Peterson said, already reaching for the phone, recognizing the tone that brooked no argument. Marcus didn't waste a second. He walked straight past his car in the parking lot and headed for his house on base, a short 2-minute drive away. He had a choice to make. He could go in civilian clothes as a concerned father, or he could go as who he was, a command sergeant major of the United States Army. He knew the power of symbols. He had seen a uniform change the entire dynamic of a room, a village, a negotiation. This wasn't about intimidation. It was about representation. It was about showing up for his son with the full weight of the honor and discipline he had dedicated his life to. He was not just Marcus Smith, the dad. He was CSM Smith, a man who understood rules, regulations, and respect, and who demanded the same from others. 5 minutes later, he strode out of his house. He was immaculate. He wore his army service uniform, the formal dress blues. The deep blue coat was perfectly tailored, adorned with a rainbow of ribbons on his chest, each one representing a tour, a commendation, a piece of his life given in service. The combat infantryman badge, the ranger tab, the airborne wings. On his sleeves were the chevrons of his rank, and on his collar the polished brass insignia of the infantry. His trousers had a single gold stripe down the leg, crisp and sharp. His black beret was seated perfectly on his head. He looked like he had stepped directly out of a recruitment poster, an image of absolute, unshakable authority. The 30-minute drive to Northwood High felt like an eternity. He kept his hands steady on the wheel, his breathing even. Panic was a luxury he couldn't afford. He needed to be cold. He needed to be precise. He replayed Sarah's frantic words. Something terrible is happening. They took him to the office. Handcuffs. Handcuffs. The word echoed in his mind, a discordant clang against the quiet hum of the engine. His son. His gentle, artistic, rule-following son. In handcuffs. For what? A forgotten textbook. A smart answer. A crime he couldn't even begin to imagine Michael committing. An icy rage, pure and potent, began to build behind the wall of his discipline. He let it simmer. He would need it. He pulled into the visitor parking lot of Northwood High. As he got out of his car, a few students loitering outside stopped and stared, their jaws slack. He ignored them. His stride was measured and powerful, the click of his polished dress shoes on the pavement, a steady rhythmic beat. He entered the school's main office, and the chatter from the front desk secretaries died instantly. Every head turned. "May I help you, sir?" One of the secretaries stammered, her eyes wide, as she took in the uniform. "I'm here to see my son, Michael Smith," Marcus said. His voice was quiet, yet it filled the entire room. "I was told he is in the principal's office." "Of course, sir." "Right this way," she said, practically leaping from her chair to open the door to the inner offices. He walked down the short hallway. Through the frosted glass of Principal Thompson's office, he could see the silhouettes of 4 people. One was clearly his son, slumped in a chair. 2 others stood over him, postured with an unearned arrogance Marcus recognized instantly. The 4th was pacing behind a desk. He didn't knock. He opened the door. The scene inside froze. Officer Kyler was in the middle of a tirade, his face red. "And until you start showing some respect, you can sit here and think about what you've done." Officer Davis was looking down at his shoes. Mr. Thompson was rubbing his temples, and Michael, his head bowed, his thin wrists bound behind his back, looked up as the door opened. A wave of relief and shame washed over his face. Dad Marcus Smith stepped into the room, his 6'2" frame seeming to suck all the oxygen out of the air. He surveyed the scene in a single sweeping glance, the overturned backpack, his son's art scattered on the floor like trash. The handcuffs, the smug look on Kyler's face, instantly souring into confusion and disbelief. He closed the door behind him with a soft click. The sound was as final as a gavel strike. He slowly, deliberately removed his beret, tucked it under his arm, and looked at the 2 police officers. His eyes, which had assessed threats on battlefields, now assessed them. "I am Command Sergeant Major Marcus Smith," he said, his voice a low baritone, devoid of emotion, but heavy with implication. "I am Michael's father. Who is in charge here?" Kyler, momentarily stunned by the uniform, quickly tried to regain his footing. He puffed out his chest. "I'm Officer Kyler, and this is Officer Davis. We're in charge of this situation." Marcus's gaze was unwavering. "Officer Kyler." And what precisely is this situation? Your son was involved in an incident involving illicit substances on school grounds. He refused to cooperate, and we found this. Kyla gestured dismissively at the sketchbook on the floor. Suspicious material. He's being detained for questioning. Marcus's eyes flickered to the sketchbook, then back to Kyla. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. Officer Kyla. What is your badge number? Kyla blinked. What your badge number? I'd like to have it. And your partner's as well. For my report. Report. What report? Kyla blustered. The one I will be filing with your commanding officer, the Chief of Police, the Mayor's office, and the Northwood Unified School District Superintendent. Marcus said calmly. Now your badge number, please. Kyla reluctantly rattled off his number. Davis did the same, his voice barely audible. Marcus repeated them slowly, committing them to memory. Then he turned his attention to the principal. Mr. Thompson, as the ranking authority in this school, did you witness the events leading to my son being placed in handcuffs? Thompson swallowed hard beads of sweat on his forehead. Well, Sergeant Major, it was a rapidly evolving situation. The officers felt it was a necessary precaution for safety. Safety. Marcus repeated the word, letting it hang in the air. The safety of whom? From whom, my son? A 15-year-old honors student, or was this about the safety of your officers' egos? He took a step forward, his polished shoes making no sound on the floor. He knelt, not breaking eye contact with Kyla, and began to carefully gather the scattered pages of his son's artwork. He stacked them neatly, his large, calloused hands gentle with the paper. He placed the sketchbook on the corner of the principal's desk. I have a few questions, Officer Kyla, Marcus said, standing back up to his full height. First, under which specific statute of the state penal code has my son been charged? Kyla's face was turning a blotchy red. He's not charged yet. He's being detained for questioning. Detained, Marcus said. Detention requires reasonable, articulable suspicion that a crime is being or is about to be committed. You found no illicit substances on his person or in his bag. Correct? Well, no, but you found a sketchbook with drawings, and from that you deduced a threat worthy of placing a minor in restraints. Is that the official story you'll be putting in your report? Listen, Sergeant Major. With all due respect, you're a soldier. I'm a cop. We have procedures, Kyla said, trying to assert some semblance of authority. The remark was a mistake. A cold, dangerous light flickered in Marcus's eyes. Officer, do not lecture me about procedure, he said, his voice dropping an octave each word, a chip of ice. My procedures are outlined in the Uniform Code of Military Justice, the Geneva Conventions, and the Rules of Engagement. They are forged in blood and validated by acts of Congress. They determine who lives and who dies on a battlefield. Your procedures are from a department handbook that you at this moment appear to be flagrantly violating. You illegally searched my son's property without probable cause. Reasonable suspicion for a school search does not extend to baseless fishing expeditions. You escalated a conversation into a physical confrontation, and you put a child in handcuffs for drawing pictures, causing him emotional distress and public humiliation. You have not followed procedure. You have engaged in a campaign of harassment and abuse of authority. He paused, letting his words sink in. The room was utterly silent. Davis looked like he wanted the floor to swallow him whole. Thompson stared at his desk, unable to meet anyone's eyes. Marcus then turned his gaze fully on his son. He saw the tear tracks on Michael's face, the fear in his eyes. The father in him, the protector, finally broke through the soldier's icy calm, not with a shout, but with a simple, unyielding command. "Officer Kyler, you have 60 seconds to take those cuffs off my son, or your commanding officer won't be hearing from me in a report. He'll be hearing from my lawyer in a federal civil rights lawsuit for unlawful detainment of a minor. And I assure you my lawyer is significantly more aggressive than I am." He glanced at the clock on the wall. "Your time has started." The 60 seconds that followed were the most charged and silent moments in the history of Principal Thompson's office. The ticking of the wall clock sounded like hammer blows. Officer Kyler stood frozen, his face a canvas of warring emotions, anger, humiliation, and the dawning, terrifying realization that he had picked a fight with the wrong man. He looked to Mr. Thompson for support, but the principal was a monument to spinelessness, staring intently at a paperclip on his desk as if it held the secrets to the universe. He glanced at his partner Davis, who simply gave a slight, almost imperceptible shake of his head, a clear signal. "This is a losing battle. Cut our losses." Marcus Smith did not move. He stood at parade rest, his hands clasped behind his back, his posture ramrod straight. His gaze was fixed on Kyler, not with overt aggression, but with an unnerving, patient intensity. It was the look of a man who had waited out enemy combatants in far more dangerous situations than this. He was not making a threat. He was stating a fact. With 10 seconds left on the clock, Kyler cracked. He let out a harsh, frustrated sigh and pulled the key from his belt. He moved toward Michael, his movements jerky and angry. "Fine," he muttered, grabbing Michael's arm with unnecessary roughness. "But this is going in my report. Your son was non-compliant and belligerent. He was terrified," Marcus corrected him, his voice still level, yet carrying a clear warning. "And every action you have taken has been documented. Be very careful what you write in that report, officer. Falsifying a police document is a felony. I'm sure you know that procedure." The click of the handcuffs coming off Michael's wrists was the sound of surrender. Michael immediately brought his hands around, rubbing his red, chafed skin. He wouldn't look at his father. His eyes fixed on the floor, a deep flush of shame on his cheeks. Marcus stepped forward and placed a firm, comforting hand on his son's shoulder. "It's okay, son. You're okay." He then looked at Kyler. "We're leaving. My son will not be answering any more of your questions. Am I clear?" Kyler just glared, saying nothing. "Mr. Thompson," Marcus said, turning to the principal, "I am taking my son home. He is emotionally distressed due to the actions of your staff and these officers on your campus. I expect a full written incident report from you on my desk by tomorrow morning. Not an email, a signed hard copy letter. It will detail why you authorized this search and why you failed to de-escalate this situation and protect my son. If it is not there, my next stop will be the school board." Thompson could only nod, his face pale and clammy. Marcus helped a still shaken Michael to his feet. "Collect your things, Michael." Michael knelt and quickly shoved his textbooks and supplies back into his backpack. He hesitated over the sketchbook. Marcus picked it up and handed it to him. "Your art is nothing to be ashamed of. Ever." As they walked to the door, Marcus paused and turned back one last time. "Officer Kyler, Officer Davis, you should know that the Northwood community has a large number of active duty and retired military families. Families who have sent their sons and daughters to defend the very freedoms you seem to hold in such low regard. I will be sure to share my experience here today with them. I imagine they'll be very interested to learn how our children are being treated." With that final, perfectly targeted shot, he guided his son out of the office, leaving the three men standing in the ruins of their authority. The walk back through the school was different. The whispers now were not of a young troublemaker, but of the formidable man in the dress blues who had just walked into the lion's den and emerged with his cub, leaving the lions looking like chastened house cats. Sarah was waiting by the main entrance, her face etched with worry. When she saw Michael was safe, she rushed to him, throwing her arms around him in a fierce hug. "I'm so sorry, Michael," she whispered. "I didn't know what else to do." "You did exactly the right thing," young Lady Marcus said, his voice softer now. "You were brave. Thank you." He looked at Michael. "Let's go home." The car ride was silent for the first 10 minutes. Michael stared out the window, watching the familiar suburban houses slip by. Marcus drove his knuckles white on the steering wheel, the icy rage from earlier now being methodically channeled into a plan of action. Finally, Michael spoke, his voice thick with unshed tears. He said my drawings looked like gang stuff. He made me feel like a criminal dad. In front of everyone. Marcus reached over and squeezed his son's shoulder. What you felt was humiliation. What he did was abuse his power. Those are two very different things. His opinion of your art and of you is worthless. It doesn't define you. Understand, Michael nodded, wiping a tear from his eye. What happened in there was not your fault. Marcus continued. You did nothing wrong. You were profiled, you were targeted, and you were bullied by a man with a badge who has forgotten what it means to serve. This is not on you. This is on him. And we are not going to let it go. When they got home, Michael's mother Eleanor was already there. Sarah had called her after calling Marcus. Elena, a charge nurse in the local hospital's ER, was just as disciplined as her husband, though her strength was quieter, more empathetic. She enveloped Michael in a hug the moment he walked through the door, holding him tight. "I'm okay, Mom," he mumbled into her shoulder. "No, you're not," she said, softly, pulling back to look at his face. "But you will be." That evening, the Smith home became a command center. While Elena focused on Michael making him his favorite meal and just sitting with him while he decompressed, Marcus went to work. His first call was not to a lawyer, but to the public affairs office on his base. He spoke to a major he knew, explaining the situation in calm, measured tones. He wasn't asking the army to intervene, but he was making them aware. A command sergeant major's son being wrongfully detained by local police while the father was on duty was an optics issue, and Marcus knew how to use the system. His second call was to a name he had stored in his phone for years, a relic from a past legal issue involving a soldier wrongfully accused of a DUI. Evelyn Reed. She was a civil rights attorney in the city, a sharp, no-nonsense black woman with a reputation for taking on police misconduct cases and winning. "Evelyn, it's Marcus Smith." "Sergeant Major." Her voice was warm but professional. "It's been a while. I trust you're not calling to chat about the weather." "What's the situation?" Marcus laid it all out. The vape pretext, the search of the backpack, the mischaracterization of his son's art, the handcuffs, the principals in action. He relayed the officers' names and badge numbers. There was a pause on the other end of the line. Kyla Evelyn said, her voice turning hard. "That name rings a bell. A loud one. Marcus, you and Michael need to come to my office first thing in the morning. 9 a.m. Don't talk to anyone else from the school or the police department. No one." "Is that clear?" Crystal, Marcus replied. His last action of the night was online. He went to the Northwood Police Department's website and the Northwood Unified School District's site. He downloaded the SRO program's Memorandum of Understanding, MOU, the official document outlining the rules of engagement for police in schools. He read all 37 pages, highlighting sections with the focus of a battlefield strategist studying a map. He found what he was looking for in Section 4, Paragraph B. SROs shall not use police powers to address traditional school disciplinary violations that can be safely and appropriately handled by school staff. And Paragraph C, the use of restraints such as handcuffs on students shall be limited to situations where a student poses an imminent threat of physical harm to themselves or others. Kyler hadn't just bent the rules, he had shattered them. The next morning at the law offices of Reed and Associates, Evelyn Reed confirmed his suspicions. She was a formidable presence, dressed in a sharp pantsuit, her office overlooking the city skyline. Officer Kyler has a history, she said, tapping a folder on her desk after they had recounted the story again. 3 formal complaints in the last 2 years, 1 for excessive force during a traffic stop, 2 for harassment. All of them were investigated internally and dismissed for insufficient evidence. The department protects its own, especially bullies like him. She looked at Michael, her expression softening. Michael, I know this is hard, but would you be willing to tell your story? Not just to me, but to others. Michael looked at his father, who gave him a reassuring nod. Yes, ma'am, he said, his voice quiet but firm. Good, Evelyn smiled. Because we're not just going to file a complaint, we're going to light a fire. Marcus, that uniform you wore yesterday, that was a powerful statement. People listen to a man like you. We're going to make sure they hear you. The plan was multi-pronged. First, Evelyn filed a formal notice of intent to sue with the police department and the school district, alleging civil rights violations, assault, and emotional distress. It was a legal bombshell. Second, Marcus, with Evelyn's guidance, wrote a letter. It was addressed to the editor of the Northwood Chronicle, the local newspaper. It was also sent to the city council and the head of the school board. In clear, powerful prose, he detailed the incident not as an angry father, but as a concerned citizen and a military leader. He wrote about the trust between a community and its police, and how that trust was broken. He wrote about his son's love for art being twisted into a weapon against him. He ended the letter with a simple, chilling question. If this can happen to my son, the son of a command sergeant major, with no provocation, who is next, whose child will be the next to be handcuffed for a misunderstanding. The fallout was immediate and explosive. The Chronicle ran the letter on the front page of its Sunday edition under the headline, Decorated Soldier Accuses SRO of Abusing Son at Northwood High. They included a photo of Marcus in his dress blues from a recent military event. The story spread like wildfire on social media. The school district's Facebook page was inundated with comments from angry parents. Many shared their own smaller but still unsettling encounters with Officer Kyler. A pattern of behavior began to emerge in the public square. Principal Thompson, under immense pressure, issued a weak, jargon-filled statement about ongoing investigations and commitment to student safety, which only fanned the flames. The police chief was forced to place both Kyler and Davis on paid administrative leave, a standard procedure that did little to placate the growing public anger. The real twist, however, came from Evelyn Reed's investigation. As she dug into the previously dismissed complaints against Kyler, she found a detail that had been buried. One of the harassment complaints had been filed by a man whose nephew had been illegally searched at a public park. The man had tried to pursue it, but was stonewalled by the department. That man's name was Arthur Ballard. Evelyn's eyes lit up when she saw the name. Arthur Ballard had in the last election cycle been elected to the city council. He now sat on the very committee that oversaw police funding and internal affairs. She picked up the phone. "Councilman Ballard, this is Evelyn Reed. We haven't spoken before, but I believe we have a mutual interest in the conduct of a Northwood police officer named Kyler." The phone call from Evelyn Reed was the catalyst that turned a contained fire into an inferno. Councilman Arthur Ballard had not forgotten the dismissive way his complaint about his nephew had been handled 2 years prior. He had been a private citizen, then a small business owner with little leverage. Now he was a man with a platform and a deep-seated frustration with a police department that seemed to operate with impunity. The story of Michael Smith wasn't just an echo of his own experience. It was a vindication. "Ms. Reed." Ballard's voice was grim over the phone. "I remember Officer Kyler very well. Tell your client, Sergeant Major Smith, that he has my full support. And tell him I'm calling for a public open-session city council meeting to discuss the school resource officer program and the conduct of Officer Kyler. It's time for some accountability." The announcement of a special public meeting sent shockwaves through the city's administration. It was one thing to handle an angry letter or a pending lawsuit. It was another entirely to face a public grilling broadcast on the local access channel with the media in attendance. The police chief, a man who usually projected an aura of calm control, was suddenly on the defensive, his department's dirty laundry about to be aired for all to see. Principal Thompson, who had hoped the issue would fade away, received a summons to attend and speak. His carefully constructed world of bureaucratic insulation was crumbling. The night of the city council meeting, the main chamber at City Hall was packed to overflowing. It was a cross-section of Northwood concerned parents, teachers in their union T-shirts, high school students, and a significant number of veterans and active duty soldiers in civilian clothes, a quiet but powerful show of solidarity for Marcus Smith. The local news had set up cameras in the back. Michael sat between his parents in the front row. He was nervous, but the fear he'd felt in the principal's office had been replaced by a quiet resolve. He looked around the room and saw friends from school neighbors, and even some of his teachers giving him small, encouraging nods. He wasn't alone anymore. The meeting began with Councilman Ballard laying out the agenda. His tone was severe. "We are here tonight to discuss a serious breach of trust," he began. "An incident at Northwood High has brought to light disturbing questions about the conduct of our SROs and the policies that govern them. We will have transparency tonight." He called Principal Thompson to the podium first. Thompson looked like a man walking to his own execution. He read from a prepared statement, his voice trembling, filled with administrative jargon about protocols and interagency cooperation. A councilwoman with sharp eyes and a sharper tongue cut him off. "Mr. Thompson, let's dispense with the talking points. A 15-year-old honors student was handcuffed in your office. Yes or no, did you believe he was a physical threat to anyone at that moment?" Thompson stammered. "Well, the officer assessed the situation, and I'm not asking the officer. I'm asking you. You are the principal of that school, the ultimate authority. Did you believe Michael Smith was about to harm someone? Trapped?" Thompson finally mumbled, "No, I did not." A wave of murmurs rippled through the audience. It was a damning admission. Next, the police chief was called. He defended his officer, speaking of the split-second decisions law enforcement must make. He tried to paint Kyler as a proactive officer, dedicated to keeping schools safe. That was the cue for Evelyn Reed. She approached the podium, a thick binder in her hand. "Chief, while we all appreciate the difficulty of your officers' jobs, we must also insist on professionalism. I have here the official MOU between your department and the school district." She opened the binder. It states, and I quote, "SROs shall not use police powers to address traditional school disciplinary violations." Was a vape pen, which was never found, considered a matter for law enforcement or school discipline? The chief conceded it was typically a school matter. And it states, Evelyn continued, her voice rising, that handcuffs are for students who pose an imminent threat. Was a boy sitting quietly in a chair an imminent threat? The chief was cornered. In the officer's judgment, Evelyn countered, is precisely what we are here to question. She then presented the file on Kyla's past complaints, including the one from Councilman Ballard's nephew, laying out a clear, documented pattern of aggressive behavior and harassment that had been systematically ignored by the department's internal affairs. The chief's face went rigid. Finally, Councilman Ballard said, "We will now hear from the family. Sergeant Major Smith." Marcus walked to the podium. He was not in uniform tonight, but in a simple, well-tailored suit. He didn't need the uniform anymore. His reputation and his story preceded him. The room fell silent. He didn't speak of lawsuits or anger. He spoke about values. "I have served this country for 22 years. He began, his voice calm and steady, resonating through the chamber. "I have served in places where there is no rule of law, where a man with a gun is the only law. I served so that my son would not have to live in a world like that. I served so that he could live in a country where he is judged by his character, not by the color of his skin or the art he creates." He looked directly at the council members. "The uniform I wear is a symbol of trust. The badge your officers wear is also a symbol of trust. On that day in Northwood High, that trust was broken. An officer sworn to protect chose to bully. A principal sworn to educate chose to be silent. They did not see a child. They saw a target, and in doing so they failed not just my son. They failed this entire community." He paused, letting the weight of his words settle. "This is not about money. This is about accountability. It's about ensuring that no other child in any of our schools has their spirit damaged and their rights violated by someone who has forgotten the meaning of the word serve." He finished, and for a moment there was complete silence. Then a single person started clapping, then another and another, until the entire room erupted in a sustained, thunderous standing ovation. The fallout from the meeting was a swift and brutal reckoning. The public outcry was too loud to ignore. Within a week, facing overwhelming pressure and a unanimous no-confidence vote from the city council, the police chief announced Officer Kyla's termination for gross violation of department policy. Officer Davis, in an attempt to save his own career, had given a full statement to Internal Affairs corroborating Marcus's entire account and admitting Kyla had no probable cause and had acted out of anger. Davis received a lengthy suspension and was reassigned to a desk, his career as a patrol officer effectively over. The school board, facing a deluge of angry emails and calls from parents, convened their own emergency session. Principal Thompson was given a choice: resign or be terminated. He quietly submitted his resignation the next day, his career as an educator disgraced. The board publicly apologized to the Smith family and pledged a complete overhaul of the SRO program, working with a new community oversight committee, co-chaired at the board's request by Marcus Smith himself. Evelyn Reed's lawsuit was settled out of court. The city and school district, facing a mountain of evidence, and terrible publicity, quickly agreed to a substantial sum. Marcus and Elena announced that the money would be placed in a trust for Michael's college education, with a significant portion being donated to establish the Northwood Youth Arts Initiative, a grant program to provide supplies and opportunities for young aspiring artists in the community. They had turned their son's pain into a force for good. But the hardest karma was yet to come, and it was reserved for Kyler. The public firing was a professional death sentence, but Councilman Ballard wasn't finished. Spurred by the revelations at the meeting, he used his position to formally reopen the investigation into his nephew's harassment case. With new public scrutiny and a police department desperate to appear reformed, the insufficient evidence suddenly became sufficient. Investigators found that Kyler had not only illegally searched Ballard's nephew, but had also lied on the official report, the very felony Marcus had warned him about. A month after he was fired, a warrant was issued for the arrest of former officer Kyler on charges of perjury and falsifying a government record. The man who had put handcuffs on a child for his art found himself in handcuffs, his smug mugshot splashed across the same newspaper that had once heralded his work as an SRO. His life was ruined not just by his actions against Michael, but by the arrogance of his past catching up with him. He had thought he was above the law, only to be crushed by it. A few weeks later, Marcus walked into Michael's room. The boy was at his desk, sketching in a new high-quality notebook his father had bought him. He was designing a new character, a tall, powerful figure in futuristic armor, with the bearing of a soldier and the quiet intensity of a protector. It looked a lot like his dad. "How's it going, son?" Marcus asked, leaning against the doorframe. "It's going good," Michael said, turning to show him the drawing. "I'm calling him the Sentinel. He doesn't have any superpowers. His strength is just showing up when he's needed and making people do the right thing." Marcus smiled a genuine, proud smile. "I like that. That's the best kind of power." Michael looked at his father, the last vestiges of shame finally gone from his eyes, replaced by a quiet confidence he hadn't possessed before. "Dad, thank you. For everything." "Always, Michael," Marcus said, his voice thick with emotion. "I will always show up for you." He knew the scars from that day in the principal's office might never fully fade, but he also knew his son was stronger. Michael had learned a hard lesson about the world, but he had also learned a powerful one, that injustice thrives in silence, and the voice of one person speaking with courage and conviction could be enough to bring a reckoning. What you just heard wasn't just a story about a father and a son. It was a story about the power of integrity in the face of injustice. It's a reminder that the uniforms people wear are only as honorable as the person wearing them, and that true strength isn't about intimidation. It's about standing up for what's right, especially when it's hard. The events at Northwood High changed a community, but it all started with one person refusing to accept that their child could be treated as less than. If this story resonated with you, if you believe in the power of accountability and standing up for our kids, please hit that like button and share this video so more people can hear this powerful message. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on notifications so you won't miss our next story about real-life karma and the everyday heroes who walk among us.